What makes Othello so dangerous isn't just jealousy, and it isn't just race either. What makes it disturbing is how quickly someone's version of the truth can take over when power decides who gets believed. In this play, Shakespeare shows the greatest danger doesn't come from race alone, but from how gender and power shape trust, authority, and control. Through the silencing of women and other unchecked influence of male dominance, truth becomes easy to manipulate inside rigid social roles. To show this, I'm going to look at three main ideas: male authority, manipulation of truth, and how women are silenced, before addressing race as an important but incomplete explanation. First, we have to understand the world of the play itself, because the power structure is already built before the tragedy even begins. From the start, Othello is a world built on hierarchy, rank, and male authority. Power isn't just political or military, it shapes relationships too. Othello says, "I won his daughter." That wording matters. It makes marriage sound like possession, like Desdemona is something earned rather than someone equal. At the same time, Iago's frustration with promotion shows how much status controls the society. He says, "'Tis the curse of service. Preferment goes by letter and affection." In other words, power doesn't always follow fairness, it follows influence. And once authority becomes the main way people decide who to trust, truth starts depending on who has the strongest voice. Literary critics like Ruth Veneta argue that wives in Othello exist within social systems where their safety and credibility depend heavily on male authority, which reinforces how power shapes every relationship in the play. This matters because Othello isn't operating in a neutral world. He's operating in a system that already tells him who deserves respect and who doesn't. And once trust is based on rank instead of proof, it becomes very easy for someone like Iago to take control of the story. The real tragedy begins when authority turns into manipulation. Iago doesn't force Othello to believe anything, he just slowly redirects what Othello thinks is true. Othello says, "Iago is most honest." That line is almost painful because the audience already knows Iago is lying, but Othello trusts him because he fits the role of a loyal soldier. Iago then pretends to warn Othello, saying, "Beware, my lord, of jealousy." But this is manipulation, disguised as advice. He plants doubt without giving real evidence. What's important here is that Iago doesn't prove anything. He only needs Othello's emotions to take over. Once fear replaces communication, truth stops being something stable. It becomes something that can be shaped. Shakespeare is basically showing how authority plus insecurity creates perfect environment for misinformation. Scholarly feminist criticism also suggests that the play exposes how social expectations and power structure make characters vulnerable to manipulation, especially when authority is valued more than communication. But the biggest evidence that truth gets controlled comes from what happens to women in the play, because even when they speak honestly, they aren't believed. Desdemona's tragedy isn't just that she dies, it's that her voice never carries enough weight to stop what's happening. When Othello demands, "Swear thou art honest," he's not actually asking for truth. He's demanding confirmation of what he already believes. Even though Desdemona insists she is innocent, male authority overrides her reality. Her words simply don't compete with Othello's power. Emilia becomes the character who finally breaks the silence. She says, "I will not charm my tongue. I am bound to speak." But the moment she finally speaks, Desdemona is already dead. The truth comes too late. Emilia also directly criticizes gender expectations when she says, "Men are all but stomachs, and we all but food." She exposes how women are treated as something consumed rather than respected. And when she says, "Let husbands know their wives have sense like them," Shakespeare makes the message clear. Women have same capacity for thought and feeling, but society refuses to treat them equally. This connects to feminist literary criticism, which argues that Shakespeare uses Desdemona and Emilia to expose how patriarchal systems silence women and limit their agency inside marriage and society. At this point, the play stops being just a personal tragedy. It becomes a critique of a social system. Now, a lot of people argue that race is the main cause of tragedy, and that's an important argument to consider. Race absolutely matters in Othello. Characters use race as a weapon, and it shapes how others perceive Othello. Raventio accuses him of enchanting Desdemona, and Othello himself says, "Happily, for I am black." These moments show real insecurity and prejudice, but race alone doesn't explain why everything collapses. The reason it becomes deadly is because it feeds into the same systems we've already seen: authority, male honor, and control. Race becomes a catalyst, but the structure that actually allows the tragedy to happen is the power system itself. And this idea becomes even clearer when looking at an outside perspective, especially what Professor Friedman pointed out during our interview. In our interview, Professor Friedman explained something that really connects to this idea of trust and authority. All right. How do power dynamics influence who we trust and who we doubt in society today, especially in professional or institutional settings?
Power is really critical, and it can really be the prominent force in helping us know who we trust. In theory, we would trust the President of the United States because of the power and the position. We, no doubt, in an academic setting, we trust the president of the institution. We trust, sometimes, just to keep it in an academic setting, we trust, in many cases, faculty because of their position, their background, their experiences. And so the titles and power and position do help us develop a baseline of trust. The challenge, I think, for all of us is to be careful about that trust.
Great, thank you. Great. How do societal expectations shape how people behave in relationships or positions of authority?
Societal expectations are a huge force. They can tell us all how we ought to behave. If you have this role, this is how. If you're a student, this is how you should behave. If you are, let's say, a faculty member, this is how you should behave. This is acceptable behavior to you. So they're hugely influential. It's not too specific, but they're huge.
What stood out to me is how trust often comes from someone's position or status rather than evidence. That's exactly what happens between Othello and Iago. The interview reinforces the idea that when authority replaces communication, people stop questioning what they hear, and that's when manipulation wins. To show how this looks emotionally from inside the play, I wanted to imagine a short conversation, not between two scholars, but between the characters themselves. General, be honest. Why was it easier for you to believe me than your wife?
Because you were my soldier. You stood beside me. You spoke like duty.
And Desdemona, she begged you to listen. Why wasn't her word enough?
Because a man's reputation is everything. If I am fooled, I am weak.
So this wasn't just love, it was control.
I wanted proof, but really I wanted control. The moment that I chose control over trust, truth died.
In the end, Othello shows how dangerous it becomes when power and gender expectations decide who gets believed, when control becomes more important than trust, and when women's voices are ignored, truth becomes easy to manipulate, and tragedy becomes inevitable. Both literary critics and feminist scholars suggest that Shakespeare's tragedy works as a warning about the social systems that shape identity, authority, and whose voices are valued. Shakespeare's warnings still matter today because these systems don't disappear, they just change form. The real question becomes, who do we automatically trust, and who do we fail to listen to?